How many times do we have to see evidence of the fact that the world that we have created is having devastating effects on the children that we are bringing into it? Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. If you are new here, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you're returning, welcome back. Thank you so much for the support. On my channel, I like to give my opinion and perspective on things that are happening today, things that I think actually matter to everyday people, especially those of us trying to raise kids in the insanity known as today's society. I do like to talk about current events and politics, and my perspective does tend to be more on the conservative side of things. Be sure to like this video, leave a comment below, and also share it with others. Also, be sure you are subscribed to my channel. Help me to grow this channel to hopefully reach more people that value logic, reason, and sanity. Also, be sure to find me on Rumble under Outspoken Samantha in the event that YouTube decides I have violated their community standards and chooses to kick me off their platform forever. That being said, let's get into today's topic. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about this situation that happened just a few days ago where this 6-year-old child brought a firearm to school and shot his teacher. I know, just a very shocking and heartbreaking and tragic story, and I'm sure a lot of us have the same questions about what the heck happened. If you're not familiar with the story or the timeline or how things kind of played out, just a brief rundown. So this was at Richneck Elementary School in Newport News, Virginia. And what happened was this student apparently took a firearm from home, snuck it into their backpack, and got it into the school. Yes, the school does have security and they do have metal detectors, but it is by random search. So he just played the odds and happened to get past security. The incident didn't take place until about 2 o'clock. So this child had this firearm in their backpack for 5 to 6 hours before anything happened. Dispatch got a call, I believe at 1:59 p.m. saying that there had been a shooting at the school. The sheriff's deputies and the police officers were there by, I want to say, 2:04. It was very quickly. They were able to find the student in the being restrained by another staff member in the classroom. Apparently the student was very combative with the staff member, hitting them and just, kind of acting out, as I'm sure a child would in a very stressful situation. But they were able to take this child, put him in the back of the police car. I believe at some point he was taken to the hospital for evaluation. As far as the teacher, she apparently was teaching a lesson when the child pulled the firearm out. She took a defensive position like this and it went through her hand and into her upper chest. So she was very severely injured, but despite her injury, she was able to make sure all of her students got out of the classroom. She, even on the video cameras or on the security cameras, you can see her stop and turn around and look, even though she's injured, just to make sure everybody is out of the classroom. She then made her way to the administrative office, which is where the paramedics found her and were able to take her to the hospital. Initially, she was listed as critically injured, in critical condition, but since then has been upgraded to stable condition. So that is really, I'm glad to hear that she is doing okay. And any interviews that she's had since then, her first question has always been, how are my students? Are they doing okay? Which is just really a testament to the kind of person that she is. But, so that's kind of how that all played out. And I know that a lot of us probably have the same questions about how this happened and kind of what the contributing factors might have been. But for me, and I'm sure for a lot of us are thinking, how did this 6-year-old get a firearm? How did they get a gun out of the home, sneak it to school, hang on to it for hours, and then have this happen? And it's absolutely crazy to me because as a gun owner myself, we keep ours secure, locked up. Our kids couldn't get to them. And, so if your firearm is in your home and it's so easy to get to that your 6-year-old can just sneak it out of the house, clearly it is not secure enough. And I try really hard not to judge other parents because honestly, we are all doing the best we can. I get it. Nobody's perfect. But this one I might have just a little bit of judgment on because, what the heck? Your kid should never be able to get to something like that. There are so many things that we lock up in our homes to keep our children safe. Why would that not be a priority? So obviously I don't know what happened or how they accessed it, but you just kind of have to wonder. So I think the bigger question, though, is how did it get on a 6-year-old's radar and into their mind to even think of this as an option, as a way to handle their frustration or their anger or whatever it is that is happening in their lives, whether it be something that happened with the teacher, she disciplined him in some way, or he got a bad grade, or, whatever it was, that this was a way that he felt was appropriate to manage that situation or to deal with it or, express his frustration with it. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I look at her and all of her little friends and her classmates and just how carefree they are, and just, I look at them and I'm like, there is no way that a 6-year-old could possibly even think to do something like that. And I was listening to some of the discussions and the reports on this, and there was a lady talking to one of these news anchors. She was an emergency medicine physician and medical director of Safe Kids DC at Children's National Hospital, and she was talking about the developmental stage, of kids that young, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, where they really have a very loose grasp, I think is how she worded it, a very loose grasp on consequences and what the effects of their decisions are, which, as I said, I have a 6-year-old. I can tell you that firsthand. So this child has a very unstable and undeveloped understanding of consequences and what the bigger impacts would be of the choices that they make, and how that something like this would affect their classmates. How would it affect their family? How would it affect them for the rest of their lives? And heaven forbid, if he had actually accomplished what it is he seemed to have set out to do and actually taken this person's life, because the police have said this was intentional, this was not an accident, how that would have impacted him, not only in the criminal sense, in the sense of the law, but psychologically for the rest of his life. And it is just so crazy to me. And, of course, the left has reacted exactly how they always react to these situations. It's about the gun laws, it's about the guns, exactly the same way that they react every time something like this happens. But it would have been just as shocking had it been another weapon, a knife, a hammer, some kind of blunt force object, anything. It doesn't matter what it is. The tool doesn't matter. It's the fact that a 6-year-old felt that this was an appropriate way to handle their negative emotions. And, I don't know, sorry. So we've got to understand that, of course, there has got to be some outside influence. There's got to be something that, influenced this child to think that this was okay, because these kind of things are learned, especially with children. We have to acknowledge the fact that there had to have been something that gave them this idea. And we have to be able to have a conversation about those things, because that's how you get to the root issue. That's how you solve these kind of problems. Because clearly guns have been legal in this country for 250 years. Guns are just as available now as they were 60 years ago. So that hasn't changed. But what has changed in society, in our homes? Like, how are kids being raised now? And what are the things that are influencing them in their lives? So I wanted to bring something else into the conversation here, because this has been on my mind for a couple of months, and it's just something that has really stuck with me, but I think it's relevant, so bear with me here. So I know I've watched a lot of those episodes of Steven Crowder that changed my mind conversations, and I know you've got to be at least familiar with them, but it's where he'll go to a college campus and he'll have some kind of topic on the poster board that says, such and such changed my mind. Like, there are only 2 genders, changed my mind. And, he'll invite, anybody that wants to come in and have a conversation with him. And typically, obviously, it's going to be somebody that opposes his views. They come and have a conversation. And usually the conversations are pretty hostile. It's very difficult to listen to, because generally the person that he's talking to just isn't interested in listening, tend to be very arrogant and just I don't know, kind of obnoxious. So, but this particular conversation stuck with me because she brought up something that had nothing to do with the topic that they were actually talking about, but it was something that really helped me understand the generation that is growing up now, and kind of the things that they deal with and how their perspective is so much different than how you or I grew up. And it was really honestly a very refreshing conversation to listen to, because they disagreed on pretty much everything, but she was interested in what he had to say. She wasn't threatened by being questioned about what she believed, and she was interested in sharing the information that she had, and enlightening him. And I was able to learn things from her just because of the way she was sharing the information, which I really appreciated. I didn't have to agree with her, but it helped me understand her better and understand her generation better. So the discussion was centered on, I think the conversation was, there are only two genders, changed my mind. But the thing that she brought up that really stuck with me was this. So Steven Crowder brought up this issue of if she would agree that today's young adults and teens have higher rates of mental health issues. And he pointed out, higher mental health issues than even at a time when people were coming back from war and facing all of these civil rights issues, and, other times in history where we have had a lot of conflict and turmoil, that now, at a time when we are the most accepting and tolerant that we have ever been, believe it or not, that the mental health crisis is still skyrocketing. And her response was, the fact that Gen Z started in 1998. That's her generation, and she was born in 2003. So at that point, 9/11 was still very fresh on everyone's minds. And I'm going to play you just about a minute of that clip, but I think you'll find it interesting what she had to say.
But you do have to realize that the world, especially in America, changed very drastically after 2001. It changed very drastically after. There's very much this is taught in history classes, there's very much a difference between pre-9/11 and very much a difference between post-9/11. And post-9/11 is seen as its own part of history because a lot of things have changed. Nowadays, kids in my generation aren't allowed to go outside because they're too worried about safety, whereas people, and may I ask how old you are? Is that rude?
No, 35.
35?
Yeah, so I'm that kind of middle young millennial. Yeah.
Yes, millennial. My parents growing up were just allowed to go outside, and their parents didn't care where they were, whereas my parents were like, no, you're a girl, you can't go outside by yourself, even if it is in suburbia. We have to deal with a lot of, because the world is very much changing, and in a lot of places it's changed for the worse, and especially since we have a lot of media that typically just pummels you with all these bad things that are happening in the world, that very much changes a generation. And if you are constantly seeing that and you are constantly exposed to life-changing things, dead bodies, wars, terrorist attacks, it very much changes your perception on life. And it's very easy for people in my generation to feel hopeless because of that.
Listening to her perspective, it reminds me of all of the things that kids, especially over the last 20 years, have had to face, where they grew up, they've grown up in almost a completely different time than a lot of us have. And it's almost like there's this line in history where, as she said, a time before 9/11 and a time after 9/11 when things completely changed, where, a lot of us were able to go out and have that independence and play outside and kind of have more freedom and less worry. And then after 9/11, a lot of things changed across the entire world. Not to mention, on top of that they've grown up with so much more media. And as she said, being just bombarded with it nonstop, and it's negativity. It's negative attention to everything that is going on in the world, and just nonstop, just hearing about it all day. I remember when I was a kid, and the only time I ever watched the news is if my parents had turned it on, and even then I would probably just tune it out and leave the room. And now it's like Kids can't do that. They're bombarded with it from every single angle. There's no way to really tune it out. And so it's not just this, being bombarded with the media, but it's this non-stop exposure to everything negative that is happening in the world. Not just like in your community and in your city, but in the entire world. And again, I remember when I was a kid, like my world consisted of like my house, my elementary school, my high school, my friends' houses, my church, like very small. But now, in the last 20 years, the world has changed so much as far as what kids are exposed to and what they have access to. And then they're hearing about just these constant dangers and threats, and they're being hit with it from everywhere, and they just can't seem to get away from it. And the messages, not only that, the messages that they've heard have just been progressively getting worse and worse, more earth-shattering, more devastating. And I've seen what happens to grown adults when they're exposed to this, the mainstream media and what's being put out there constantly, all of this negativity. And it literally is breaking people. So if it can do that to a grown adult, how do we think it's affecting young people? And, aside from all of these negative events, our priorities as a society have completely shifted. Our priorities, our morals, even the value of human life has been completely trivialized. And I'm not just talking about abortion. I'm just talking about human life in general. We're so disconnected as a society where, everything is through electronics, and we're losing that human connection. And so all of these things have played to shift society entirely, and it's happened so quickly over the course of one generation, just less than 20 years. And then on top of that, presence of parents in the home has completely changed. Most families have, if they do happen to have a two-parent home, most of the time both of those parents are working, and kids are essentially being raised by their peers, by the same people who are being bombarded with the same negative messages that they are. But of course, without the maturity and life experience of their parents to help them put it into perspective, so it doesn't affect their entire being. And at the end of this particular comment that this girl is making, she says how easy it is for her generation to feel hopeless. And if that's what her generation is feeling, how do you think kids who have been born in the last 10 years or even in the last 5 to 6 years are coping? Because things have definitely not gotten any better. And then, of course, we had COVID that just hit us 3 years ago, which is another, life-altering, world-changing, catastrophic event. And the primary message across all media since then has been nothing but death and viruses and pandemics and end of the world. And not just that, the things that they're learning about climate change. Kids are being influenced to even be afraid of the weather. So things aren't getting any better. And, so I think this brings us full circle back to the original story. How do you end up with a 6-year-old who makes such a drastic decision to do something that is so harmful, with the intention to hurt and potentially take the life of someone else? And obviously there are no easy answers. There isn't anything to say that this one particular action led them to do this. But what we do know is that the world is very ill. Society is ill. People are ill. Our morals are dying. Right versus wrong is being erased. There's division everywhere. And, everything is political. Violence has become this normalized response to pretty much everything. And you have to wonder, do we even have to ask where a child would get the idea that violence is an appropriate solution to their problems? And again, I have no idea what the thought process was in this child's head, and I'm not sure we're ever going to find out, because obviously, because they're so young, their identity is going to be protected. There's probably a lot of things that we might not know for a while, at least. But it's insane to think that the world that we've created isn't going to have this kind of effect on the kids that we're bringing into it. And it's insane to continue to blame weapons as the problem when that's not the thing that has changed over the last several decades. And of course, this famous universal tweet that comes from the left, always in response to these things, is, how many times does this have to happen before things change? Well, honestly, I think that's a great question. Of course, we know that this person is talking about gun laws, but my question is, yes, how many times does this need to happen before things change? How many times do we have to see evidence of the fact that the world that we have created is having devastating effects on the children that we are bringing into it before we take responsibility and actually work to improve things for them? And, how many times does this have to happen before we realize that we need to start creating better home environments and cleaning up our cities and streets and solving unhealthy habits, being more present in our kids' lives and putting their well-being before ourselves? There are so many things that we have the ability to do as adults, yet we consistently choose not to do them. It is easier to blame guns than it is to take responsibility. But guns don't make kids angry. Guns don't make kids feel hopeless. Guns don't teach kids to be violent. Guns don't make kids feel abandoned and unsafe and unseen and hopeless. There are no gun laws or any kind of laws that are going to fix human beings or fix the world that our children are growing up in. And until we start looking at ourselves, it would be insane to wonder why an unprecedented level of hostility and division in the world would foster anything but unprecedented shocking behaviors from younger and younger children. So yes, how many times does this need to happen before things change? And not just things, before people change, before we change, before we do better. Do something.